What situations make you feel nervous or fearful or anxious to the point that you get butterflies and feel sick to your stomach? Are there getting people and places or situations in your life that evoke kind of a fear condition response? Well, scientists in Switzerland recently identified how the vagus nerve conveys threatening gut feelings to the brain. So the vagus nerve is known as the wandering nerve because it has multiple branches, kind of like these trees that diverge from two thick stems rooted in the cerebellum and the brainstem, and it travels down to the abdomen, touching your heart and most of your major organs along the way. So this vagus means wandering, and in Latin, the words vagabond and vague and vagrant are all derived from the same Latin root. So this team of Swiss scientists produced a fascinating new study titled Gut Vagal Afferents Differentially Modulate Innate Anxiety and Learn Fear. And from this complicated name, they're saying that the vagal nerve fires input into the brain, which modulates things like anxiety and learn fear, like a teeter-totter. And that research was followed with a study published in the Journal of Neuroscience where they identified how your gut instincts coming up to the brain from this stimulation of the vagus nerve and how it is linked to different responses to fear. In other words, when you have a gut feeling about something, we finally have the science to back that statement up. So what is this brain-gut communication? And most importantly, how can the chiropractic approach to health impact this communication in a positive way? So let me explain what the vagus nerve does. The vagus nerve is constantly sending updated sensory information about the state of the body's organs upstream to your brain. So the sensory information just means the parts of the brain involved in perception of things like vision, hearing, touch, taste, smell, balance, and movement. For example, in terms of movement pathways to the brain, when I contract this muscle or move my spine, the sensors fire up and send sensory signals to the brain. Now you know from my other videos that I've done that the movement of the spine generates over 90% of the sensory information and nutrition to the brain that we require. A big reason alone, everyone in today's world needs a chiropractor for the family. But we simply are not generating enough movement spread throughout the day like our hunter-gatherer ancestors did. And we all have a hunter-gatherer genome, which hasn't changed, meaning we all require around 8 to 10 miles of walking, which generates spinal motion and sensory input and nutrition to the brain to keep us healthy. But in terms of the viscera or organ function, you and I don't feel the sensory information to the brain the way we feel it when we are moving. So just understand that we have different types of sensory information. Some you can physically feel and some you cannot. In fact, 80 to 90% of the nerve fibers in the vagus nerve are dedicated to communicating the functional state of the viscera, or the organs, up to your brain. And we never feel that. Again, your viscera is a term they use to describe your internal organs of the body, such as the liver, the heart, the stomach, and your gut. And in neuroscience, they use complicated terms called afferent and efferent. They typically refer to nerves that lead into and out of the brain, respectively. So the afferent signals are sent from a nerve receptor into the brain, while the efferent signals are sent from the brain to the peripheral body or the viscera. So sometimes we can get visceral feelings and gut instinct that are literally emotional intuitions transferred up to the brain, traveling along this vagus nerve. In previous studies, signals from the vagus nerve traveling from the gut to the brain have been linked to modulating mood and distinctive types of fear and anxiety. But as with any mind-body feedback loop, messages also travel downstream from your conscious mind through the same vagus nerve. Again, away from the brain or the efferent nerves, signaling your organs to create an inner calm so you can rest and digest during times of safety, or to prepare your body for flight in dangerous situations, like running from this train we're hearing in the background. So let's get back to that Swiss study with this horn going off. I talked earlier about that. The Swiss scientists, they snipped that afferent nerve fiber of the vagus nerve going from the gut to the brain in test rats. And then cutting the vagus nerve turned the unusual feedback loop from a two-way communication into a one-way street, and allowed the researchers to home in on the role that the vagus nerve plays in conveying the gut instinct up to the brain. So in particular, the researchers were interested in identifying the link between the anxiety and the conditioned or learned fear. So in test animals, the brain was still able to send signals down to the stomach, but the brain could no longer receive signals coming back up. Understand? Now, healthy vagus nerve communication between your gut and your brain uses neurotransmitters such as acetylcholine and GABA, right? They're like the brakes on your car. So don't get weirded out by the terms. By their very name, neuro means nerve, and transmitters means, transmitting a signal, like this train passing by. So the neurotransmitters can speed up or slow down the nerve signals. Now, these particular neurotransmitters, acetylcholine and GABA, literally lower the heart rate and the blood pressure. And they help your organs slow down so that you can rest and digest. And they stimulated the part of the nervous system that they call the parasympathetic nervous system. So the Swiss study explored the consequences of a complete disconnection of signals from the gut to the brain, and how this affected innate anxiety, conditioned fear, and subsequent neurochemical changes in the brain. So in a fear conditioning experiment, the researchers, they linked an unpleasant experience to a specific sound, like this train roaring through, getting in my way as I'm talking to you. But a variety of behavioral studies they did, the researchers determined that the rats without a fully functioning vagus nerve were less afraid of open spaces and bright lights than the control group of rats with intact vagus nerves. So without the two-way communication of the vagus nerve, the rats showed a lower level of innate fear, but a longer retention of learned fear. And the results seem to indicate that the vagus nerve is necessary to unlearn a conditioned response of fear. So from this discovery, the researchers concluded that an innate response to fear appears to be influenced significantly by your gut instinct, right? The signal sent from the stomach to the brain. So for humans, especially our kiddos, this confirms the importance of healthy vagal tone or signal activity to maintain grace under pressure and to overcome fear conditioning. That train's not going to hit me, I'm nowhere near it. I don't need to be conditioned to be afraid, right? So Mark Twain once said, we should be careful to get out of an experience only the wisdom that is in it, and stop there lest we like the cat that sits down on a hot stove lid. She will never sit down on a hot stove lid again, and that is well, but also she will never sit down on a cold one anymore. So in the book, The Athlete's Way, the author writes extensively about ways to overcome learned fear and innate anxiety. A simple mantra I use as an athlete to engage vagus nerve when faced with a threatening challenge is to take a few deep breaths and recite a line by Cora Harris, author of I'd Climb the Highest Mountain, where she says, the bravest thing you can do when you are not brave is to profess bravery and act accordingly. So on my radio show podcast, Dynamism Biohack, I'm going to be talking about breathing, where I walk you through ways to stimulate vagal tone through breathing. Techniques I picked up from experts on the subject. Subscribe to that on iTunes or iHeartRadio to listen to me every week talk about how to sort out the confusing expert opinions in terms of nutrition. Because using positive self-talk and taking deep breaths is a quick and easy way to engage the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system to calm yourself down from the top to the bottom, right? And the train goes away. See how calming it is suddenly? So the most exciting discovery of the Myers study is that the closer scrutiny of the rats' brains showed the researchers that the loss of signals coming up from the abdomen by way of the vagus nerve altered the production of both adrenaline and GABA in the brain. Now, when the researchers switched from a negative to a neutral stimulus, the rats whose gut instincts couldn't reach the brain through the vagus nerve required significantly longer to reassociate the sound with the new, safe, and neutral situation. So this finding is congruent with other recently published studies which found that stimulation of the vagus nerve can facilitate learning. And these new findings about the vagus nerve offer exciting possibilities for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So stimulation of this vagus nerve might be able to speed up the process by which people with post-traumatic stress disorder can learn to reassociate a non-threatening stimuli which triggers anxiety with a neutral, non-traumatic experience. In fact, the vagal nerve stimulation is currently used to treat epilepsy and depression, although the psychological benefits of vagal nerve stimulation does remain controversial. But in a press release, Meyer concluded, and I quote her, she says, "We were able to show for the first time that the selective interruption of the signal path from the stomach to the brain changed complete behavioral patterns. And this has traditionally been attributed to the brain alone." See, the study shows clearly that the stomach also has a say in how we respond to fear. However, what it says, or in other words, precisely what it signals, is not yet clear. So the researchers intend to do more research to better understand the exact dialogue between the vagus nerve, the gut instinct, and the brain, which will hopefully lead to more effective treatments for PTSD and other anxiety disorders. Okay, all this is leading up to the big question. What does vagal tone have to do with chiropractic care? So let me review quickly. I've introduced the importance of the vagus nerve in terms of the mind-body reciprocity. The Swiss study and others, right, makes a convincing case that any interference to the vagus nerve's ability to function correctly is worth addressing for normal health and well-being. So the vagus nerve exits from the lower portion of the brainstem through two small openings between the temporal and the occipital cranial bones. The occipital bone sits on the atlas, the first cervical vertebrae. So dysfunction to this atlanto-occipital joint can cause lack of sensory information, loss of afferent nerve signals going to the brain. This can disturb or dampen normal vagal regulation. For the precise mechanism, watch my videos called Broken Brains to get the full understanding of how this mechanism works. You can look on Facebook for that. Anyway, as chiropractors, we make adjustments to these areas, thus restoring normal joint function and in turn restoring normal afferent nerve input into the brain that appear to restore vagal nerve system function. In other words, the chiropractic adjustment supports regulation of the polyvagal system, a term coined by researcher Stephen Porges to include the parasympathetic, the sympathetic, and something called the social vagus nerve. Again, you can watch a different video I did on the polyvagal theory on my Facebook page as well to understand more of this. You just want to do that if you have a kiddo with SP, sensory processing disorder or autism or someone that's on a spectrum, we know that many ADD or ADHD and autistic kids appear to demonstrate symptoms relating to unbalanced vagal nerve function. This is just one reason why we see amazing results in these kids when they receive chiropractic adjustments. Of course, overwhelmingly recent research has found that over 80% of the serotonin is produced in the gut from vagal tone. So now you understand the connection between adjusting the spine in relation to the gut, that the chiropractic adjustment stimulates vagal tone, which sends serotonin directly to the brain, causing a sedative or calming effect amongst a whole host of amazing goodness and benefits that releasing serotonin does for the brain and the rest of the body. Look, serotonin alone is believed to help regulate mood and social behavior, appetite, digestion, sleep, memory. And for you, mom and dad, it also enhances sexual desire and function. Until next time, lighten up, move better, and live fuller. I'm Dr. Matt Hammett, reminding you that it is always a great idea to have your kiddos checked by a family-based chiropractor. I hope you enjoy this video and others like it so you can be more engaged in your spinal hygiene for your family and friends. And as always, I invite you to become patients in our practice. And if you already are, kudos to you and your family. Help us spread our message by becoming fans on our Facebook page and sharing this video. Until next time, may God bless you.